Hi, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Using Sumo Logic webinar. As you can see here, this webinar will prepare you for that Level 2 certification, so becoming a Sumo Power user is what we're aiming for. My name is Mario Sanchez, and I run training here at Sumo Logic, and as most of you have already figured out, you're all muted just to avoid distractions. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them on the chat, and we will have time for questions at the end as well. So let's get right in it. Most of you probably booked you registered for this training going through this particular site in here, and we run virtual courses, which is probably what you registered for. So what we're doing today is using Sumo Logic, which is part of this trifecta. I'm not going to dive into the basics of Sumo Logic Quick Start because I'm assuming most of you, if not all of you, have actually already attended the Quick Start. So I'm going to go deeper into some of the searching, the parsing, analyzing, and eventually how do I get all this content and start showing it in my dashboards and alerts for my troubleshooting and monitoring of my data. All right. The other thing I want to point out is I would highly encourage you that after this session you move on to the certification. This should prepare you. This webinar along with some hands-on labs. As a matter of fact, most of the labs that I will show you, most of the demo is going to come out right from here, from these particular labs. So I'm going to open it up and have it ready. But if you notice here that you can access the exact same training instance that I will be using today is the one that you can use for these labs to prepare you for that certification. So with that said, here is the instance that we will be using as a training instance. I'm logged in as myself in this training instance, but you will be able to log in as that training user. All right, so let's get started. What are we going to learn in this next couple of hours? First is understand from a unified logs and metrics solution. So what does monitoring and troubleshooting your environment look like? We're going to help you to develop not only that basic tool set that we talked about in the Quick Start a couple of days ago, but we're going to focus on advanced analytics. What can I do? What more can I do with the operators that Sumo Logic offers? And then how do I make Sumo work for me? How can I monitor the trends? How can I identify the critical events? A couple of peer use cases. We might not have a chance to go through all of them, but at least I want to point you through to where you can get a little bit of information on some of these use cases. And then last step is what's next for you. So let's get started. Like I mentioned, there are some hands-on exercises that you can tackle. This is the training environment. Here is how you can access those hands-on labs, and I will be using those as I go through this. So let's talk a little bit about. Looks like PowerPoint is leaving a little bit of a. There, it's gone. Okay, so let's talk about troubleshooting or monitoring and troubleshooting. So I'm not gonna show you the demo because we showed it in the Quick Start, but if you guys remember, what we did for monitoring and troubleshooting is we received an alert of sorts, whether it is that I'm looking at an operational overview dashboard that is starting to show a lot of reds, or perhaps I got an alert through PagerDuty or HipChat or Slack, whatever I decide to configure. I get notified of something going on. I can then start looking at dashboards. So if I have metrics up on those dashboards, that allows me to monitor, to keep an eye on what's going on. And any threshold that I reach, I can start alerting on that threshold. But if I want to really find out what is going on, why am I seeing a lot of fails, or why am I seeing a lot of reds, I have to dive into the relevant logs to start identifying why something is happening. And as you recall from the Quick Start, this is exactly what we do on that demo itself. So from a 30,000-foot view, the data flow at Sumo Logic is you start with data collection, and then you analyze that data through the use of operators, Sumo Logic operators, and at some point you want to start visualizing and monitoring that data. So today we're going to focus on number 2 and number 3. We're going to briefly talk about number 1 just to give us the right context, but there's a completely different webinar for that. As a matter of fact, it's coming up later in the week, and it's called Setting Up Sumo Logic. But today we're going to focus on number 2 and number 3. Having said that, from a data collection perspective, meaning from how you send data to Sumo Logic, there's 2 main ways that we can do it. We can do a cloud-to-cloud integration, in which case we use what we call a hosted collector because it's hosted at Sumo. Or we can do what we call an installed collector, which requires a collector to be installed at your servers or in your infrastructure. You notice the top half of this diagram is showing the cloud-to-cloud integration. We can get data from AWS and send it over to Sumo. We can do cloud-to-cloud log collection from Akamai, CDF, and WAF services. Or perhaps we can do some API cloud-to-cloud collection from some SaaS and PaaS platforms. We even have some customers doing HTTP posts from some of their clients onto Sumo Logic. On the bottom half, we have what I call the installed collectors, and you can have two flavors of this. One is you install a collector in each one of the machines that you want to collect the data from and send it over to Sumo. Or if this is something that is not allowed in your environment, perhaps you don't have outbound internet access, then you can have a centralized, and you can take advantage of your centralized infrastructure by installing a collector in a central location and then using SSH or WMI to send that data over. And if you're having some network devices, say firewalls, routers, you can SSO that data over to Sumo Logic. All right, so those are certain ways that you can get that data over to Sumo. The thing that I want to point out is when it comes to logs, there is metadata, there is stamps or these tags that get stamped on every single message that comes into Sumo. And the 5 main ones are the name of the collector that it came through, the source that it came through, the source host, the source name. This source name is the file path, the name of the log file, including the path where it came from. But there is a fifth one here called source category, and you'll be seeing me using source category because it can be freely configured, and therefore we offer some best practices on how we suggest you use your source category. Okay, so with that said, very quick review around searching and parsing. And this should all be a review for you because you saw this on the Quick Start webinar. But you want to search your data using metadata. You want to search it using keywords. You have the ability to use LiveTail. I'm going to demo most of this stuff as I prefer to demo rather than talk to it. But what does it mean to use the metadata? Well, if you guys remember, things get stamped with collector, with source category, source host. So in my case, I'm going to use source category. And in this case, I'm going to use the Labs Apache Access data that I'm going to be searching for. And if I run that quick search, you'll notice that I'm just getting a whole bunch of messages that are tagged with Lab Apache Access data coming through. My results are down at the bottom, and my query is up here at the top. If I want to find only those messages that have the word get in it, I can just enter the word get. And now all of a sudden I'm finding not only the messages from Lab Apache Access, but only those with the word get. And if you guys recall from the previous Quick Start webinar, I can do something like GE star, in which case I'll get gecko, and anything that has the word GE in it. I could have also done that here. I could have done a star. So Lab Apache Access and Lab Apache error would be found because I'm asking for anything that has Lab Apache star in it. You'll notice that the word and was implicit. So this with the word and or without means exactly the same. However, the word or is it's explicit, so you'd have to specify it in there. Okay, let's keep it simple for now. We'll just find anything with the word from Lab Apache Access with the word Mozilla in it. For the time range, most of you know how to use it. Minus 15M means the last 15 minutes. Minus 30M, the last 30 minutes. Minus 45M minus 30M means give me 15 minutes worth of data starting 30 minutes ago. So from minute 45 to all the way up to minute 30. And this little blue bubble here is showing me exactly what time frame that would look like. If you want to choose days, D is days, H is hours, you get the point, right? What if you wanted to choose very specific dates? In that case, you could choose custom and then just say from March 4th all the way through March 7th, but I want it at 8 p.m., for example, or 8 a.m., whatever the case might be. Okay, makes sense? Excellent. So let's keep it simple for now. We'll just say the last 15 minutes. You click on start, is the same as hitting enter. It just runs the query. All right, so far so good. This is just the ability to search. We also have, if you remember from the slides, the ability to run LiveTails. LiveTail means, let me just open a new tab for LiveTail. And what that allows me to do is to tail my logs. But here's the really cool thing. If I'm a developer, I probably don't even have access to production environment. Well, now all of a sudden through this UI, I'm getting access to tail a lot of these logs. But not only am I telling the log from one server, from one collector, I'm actually telling all the logs from that have Lab Apache access. If I wanted to focus on one server specifically, I could always do and source hostname. Sorry, it was underscore and hostname. Oh, and hostname equals A, B, C, D, whatever the host name happens to be. I don't remember a host name, but this is how you would go about zeroing in on a particular host name. So you can do cool things like show me when I have 404s, highlight when I have the word error, and highlight when I have the word Mozilla in it as well. And what you see from there is that anything with those errors gets highlighted. You can scroll up or down, and you can jump to the bottom so it continues searching on that stuff. So incredibly helpful, especially if you're not if you're a developer, you don't even have access to a production environment. This comes in very handy. The other thing I will show is that you can do this live tail from your desktop as well. We actually have. Let me just open our help. Actually, let me show you another way of opening our help. If you're in the UI, if you go to your Home tab, there is a Learn tab here, which I've talked about before. And from here, you can launch our documentation. So if I go in here and I show you Livetail, actually CLI, command line interface. If I show you this, you will see that there is a command line interface for Livetail, which makes it really handy because then you can run it from your desktop, and you can run things like Livetail, show me source category, prod my app with the words publish or delete in it. Or you can even do cool stuff like this one here. You can say source category equals Apache access, and then pipe that into your grep commands, and then maybe push it out to a file called out.txt. So you can get pretty creative there with what you do. All right. So continuing with our knowledge here, review that you can use metadata, you can use keywords. Remember, you can use parsing as well. Again, this hopefully is a review, but I'm going to show you the simple way of parsing. You can grab a message as an example. Let's grab this third one. Why not? We'll grab this third message as an example. I'm going to highlight everything that I want to parse. And by parsing, I mean extracting the fields that I care about. So I'm going to parse out anything that is between the word get and the word HTTP. And I'm going to extract that and call that the URL. And then I'm going to grab anything after that followed by spaces, and that's going to be my status code. And you get the point. What I'm doing is I'm using this message as an example because I know that all my Apache access messages happen to be the same. But that's not always the case. In this case, it happens to be, and it works out really nice that the formatting of these messages is always identical. Let's call this user agent. And if I click on submit, what it did is it just built this parsing statement for me. And what it says is, look for this pattern. And when you find that pattern, extract these asterisks out of it. One is going to be the URL, the status code, the refer, and so on. If I click on start on that thing, what you'll see is my message is still here on the right-hand side. This is the entire message, but I've parsed out user agent, I've parsed out URL, status code, size, refer, and these are now fields that have been extracted. And the cool thing about this is that now I could do things like count by URL. So how many messages I've had against the different URLs, and I can sort them so that I can see which is the URL that gets most hits, for example. So that's the reason why you would want to parse. But let's staying on the topic of parsing, let's look at other methods of parsing. So I'm going to go here to the help menu again, and I'm just going to look for Parse Operators because I want to show you the various operators that we have. Again, hopefully this is a review for most of you if you attended the Quick Start webinar. But we have quite a few different ways of parsing your data. I just showed you because Apache Access had a predictable pattern. I showed you how to parse using the anchor. But what if you had variable patterns? What if your IP addresses were not always going to show in the same spot? What you have to do is go find that IP address. So I'm going to show you an example of using Regex to parse out an IP address. And for most of you, I would say all of you have probably used the Regex before. I'm just going to copy and paste it here. But what this is doing is it's saying, listen, go find this pattern. it says 1 to 3 digits followed by a period, 1 to 3 digits, a period, 1 to 3 digits, a period, and 1 to 3 digits. Guess what? That sounds like an IP address, right? Yes. Find that pattern, and if you do find it, store it in a field called IP address. And let's run this query, and what you'll find out now is that I've parsed out. Here's the message. Here's user agent, URL, status code, size, refer, and there is IP address. So I now have IP address parsed, and I can do something like show me the average size. Remember, size is one of the fields that I parsed out. So show me the average size by IP address. So I'm showing you a couple of things here. I'm showing you that, one, you can have multiple parse statements in your query. Two, they don't have to be the same ones. This is a parse anchor and this is a parse regex, so it doesn't matter. You can have any different types of in there. And three, fields that come from different parse statements can be used in one same statement, so it's okay. All right, so let me just go down the list here on the parsing options, because there are a few things that you could do. You could, if your log files are in JSON format, guess what? We understand JSON format and we can easily parse that. If your fields are coming in key value, we can parse that out too. CSV, delimited text, whatever the case might be that you're parsing those logs with, we can parse them out because we understand those formats as well. There's a few others that I want to show you, a few different options. And rather than talking to them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some labs, and I'm just going to show you some of these options in here. Let's go grab, again, this is the labs that you have access to. You notice that it's walking you through some simple exercises on how to do some of this stuff. But I want to show you, there's JSON Auto as well. I want to show you this one called no drop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go grab the answer, copy it, go back to my query. I'm just going to paste it, a new search here, and I'm going to comment out a couple of fields, and then I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to walk you through using this no drop option. Okay, so what you see here is I'm pulling Lab Apache error data. And if you look at the results in there, look at the results on line number 1 in the results and line number 2, they're pretty identical. They have an IP address and they have some sort of a message afterwards. But if you look at line number 3, it has something like mod log SQL, and then it says database connection error, and then I have some sort of a message afterwards. So the pattern on those messages seems to be very different from the pattern on the first 2 messages, right? Well, let me show you something. Let's say that I wanted to parse out the IP address on these types of messages, but I wanted to parse out, let's say, the message out of these other type of messages, right? So if I just say parse client star, in this case I'm saying look for this pattern and then grab whatever is after the word client and parse it out, meaning grab this thing, and once you find it, just parse out the IP address and store that as client IP. Let me not use the no drop right now. I'm going to comment that out, run that query, and what you'll notice that happens is it comes back with results, and there is my client IP. But what just happened also is that by default, the parsing statement drops anything that does not fit that pattern. If I don't want to drop it, I can use the no drop operator. The no drop option. In that case, here is a message that doesn't have that client IP pattern, but it didn't get dropped. It's still in the running, if you will, or it's still part of my results so that I can do something else with it. So then this allows me then to look for a different parsing pattern. I can look for the word mod log SQL and then grab everything afterwards and grab the word message. So what you notice here, it's almost like using it as an OR. I parse for client IP in here, but don't drop anything that doesn't meet this parsing pattern. And then for anything else, I can parse it with a different parse statement. And if you, just for kicks, if you wanted to just show some of the ones, for example, in this case, if client IP happens to be blank, then you can add a where statement, and that would only bring up those that have an actual message and no client IP. Great. Let me show you another option. The other one I want to talk about is field. Let's see if we have enough data in here to show you this query. So field will show you that, I'm just going to do it in here as well. Erase this one, run it. What the field option allows you to do is do additional parsing of an existing field. So look at this. I'm looking at my GitHub data. and I'm only looking for those that have the word committer in it. As a matter of fact, let's comment out some of these so you can see that. There we go. So I'm just parsing out those that have the word committer, and then I'm looking for the word email, and I'm grabbing that field onto a new field called email. If I run that query, it's going to go run this for the last 15 minutes, come back with the results, and here is the user. Here's the email of the user that did the committing in my GitHub repository, right? So I've got a whole bunch of emails now. Well, what I want to do is I want to parse that email additionally, because I want to only grab, let's say that I only care for the username, or perhaps I only care for the domain. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying parse the field called email. I'm grabbing everything before the @ sign and after the @ sign, and I'm doing additional parsing of that. And if you look at that query now, it's going to give you the users, the email, and the domain, right? So then I could do something like, perhaps I only want those with the domain, where domain equals gmail.com, for example. Oops, I forgot to put my quotes. So you could do something like this. I only care for those that have a gmail.com domain, and it'll only list those. And then I could do something like, okay, now the count by users. So here's all the users that have a Gmail account. And by the way, I really only care for the top 10 or the top 5 of those, as you can see here. And so what it does is the top sorts them, and then it shows me only the top 10 of those. So you start seeing how you can use some of these additional options to start doing additional parsing of your data in here. Okay, pretty cool. So parsing is by far one of the best things that you can start doing, especially because that's exactly what you need when you want to start analyzing your data. As I mentioned in the quick start, the next step for parsing is to actually build field extraction rules. So what are field extraction rules? Well, as the name suggests, what they are, and let me just go show you here under Administration and under Manage Data Settings, there's this thing called the field extraction rules. And what field extraction rules are, these are rules to extract fields, like the name suggests. Basically, when let me go edit one so I can talk you through it. What I'm telling here, I'm creating instructions, or I'm creating a rule that says, listen, if you ever get any data where source category equals lab Apache access, I want you to apply the following path expression, meaning go and parse out all these fields for me and parse them out so that they're readily available for me to use. This is great for multiple reasons. One, it's going to make the queries run faster because now I don't have to parse them because the fields have been parsed. By the way, this parsing happens at the time that the data is getting ingested. So the data is coming into Sumo, and it's getting parsed, and it's getting indexed all at the same time. So my queries are going to run faster, but more importantly, now all users within my Sumo organization are going to be using the same names. We're all going to use the name status code versus one person using status, another one using SC, status code, and so on, right? So let me show you how do you, or where do you see these fields? Well, let's go back to our query. Let's go to this query here. Let's comment out all this stuff in here for now, and show you that if I just run a query, source category equals lab Apache access Mozilla, and I run that query, let's get rid of this left navigation for now. Right, if I run that query, what you see is here on the left-hand side are all my parsed fields. We call this the field browser. And the field browser has my IP address, the message, it has the source IP, the status code, the URL, the user agent. All the fields that I care for have been already parsed by that field extraction rule, which means that I don't even have to parse them. By the way, this one in the field extraction rule is called the source IP. So I don't even have to use my parse statements, which you notice are commented out. Source, SCR. I think that's what it's called. There we go. So I don't even have to parse my fields because those fields have already been parsed, and I can still get at the same results without having to do these parsing. So I'm going to even get rid of this altogether and just show you that I can do things like count by status code, because that field extraction rule is already doing it for me. If I could type today, that would make it a lot easier. Okay, so very, very important. If there's anything that you want to take away from today is start working on your field extraction rules. This is going to make it a lot easier for you to start analyzing your data, not only for you, but for your teammates as well. Okay. This is where when we're delivering this hands-on, we normally turn over to some labs and start trying some of these labs. These are the exact same labs that I'm walking you through, by the way. This is trying labs 1 through 3, and just to show you, it's talking about these labs in here. Labs 1, which is very simple searching, labs 2, which is some simple parsing and grouping, and lab 3, which is some of the parse options that I just showed you today. Right. Again, the idea is to give you some hands-on experience so that you can even copy and paste these same exact queries into your environment and be able to run those. So let's talk about some simple analytics. And I'm not going to go through much of this because you should know it by now, having gone through the Quick Start webinar. We do metadata and keywords. I just show you how to do some parsing. How do we go about doing some filtering? We can use the where clause. We can use the in clause operator, I should say. But eventually, we filter some of that data, then we aggregate it, and then we might want to do some formatting so that we can show those results we can show those results in graphs. So here are some of the fields. For aggregation, the basic stuff is available. Count, sum, average, min, max. For conditional, you can do the if, the matches, the in, the filters. So the basic operators are there. And from a formatting perspective, oops, sorry about that. From a formatting perspective, you have a few fields, a few options. The more interesting one, I would say, is probably that transpose one, but there's a few other ones. Like you can use the field operator to eliminate some of the fields that you don't want to show on your results. Limit can limit the number of results you show. Top also does the same, but also sorting. So there's a few options here for formatting that you have available. And of course, I send you to try some labs that are going to walk you through this. Let me to shorten this version, I'm just going to grab one of the labs that is out there. I'll do this one here, just to show you how these work. And I'll paste it, and then I'll show you those. Yeah, this is a good one to try. All right, let me go back to my instance, which is here, and we will do in this tab here. Let's just grab it. Actually, we'll leave that one. We'll open a new one. Log search. Here we go. Okay. And we'll run this query, and basically what this is doing is it's looking for labs Apache Access, then it's parsing the status code, which in reality I don't need to do, right? Because my status code has already been parsed. So I should be able to run this query for the last 15 minutes. And then I'm saying if status, so I'm showing you how to use this if operator. I'm also showing you how to use the matches operator. If status code matches for something, then it should count as a client error. So I'm creating two new fields called client error and server error. So it's going to have a bunch of ones and zeros. And then what I do is I do the exact same thing with 500s. And then I just use a sum. I sum server error as error counts. I sum client errors as client error count. And that's what I'm displaying in here. So just showing you how some of these operators can work. Pretty straightforward. All right. Let's get into the more advanced analytics, the stuff that you probably came to listen to today. So I'm going to show you a few advanced analytics operators, and I'm going to point you to some labs as well that you can try out. Again, I'm going to be grabbing some examples from those labs, but I'm also going to point you to our community, which has a lot more of these options available to you. The first one I want to talk about is the Outlier Operator. And as a matter of fact, let me do this. Rather than switching between slides, I'm going to go open Outlier, Predict, Log Reduce, and Log Compare, and just show you how to use those within Sumo. So I'm going to switch back to the instance, and I'm going to cheat here a little bit. Let me open this. I have some of these already in my favorites. So I'm going to open the Outlier Operator. I'm going to open the Predict operator for sure. And why not? Let's show you the Geo Lookup operator as well. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's start with the Geo Lookup. This is a fun one. What this one is doing is saying, listen, go grab me all the logs from a lab's Apache Access. Now that you have all those logs, you clearly have an IP address for that, right? So what I want you to do is, I want you, using the lookup operator, I want you to look up latitude and longitude from this service that we provide free of charge to all Sumo users called GeoDefault. What it is it's a database of locations along with a lot of more information that we can derive from an IP address. As a matter of fact, let's go show you the lookup operator. Here we go. And there's a few versions of this lookup operator. You can look up data in a spreadsheet. You can look up data that has already been saved to Sumo. Or in our case, what we're doing is we're doing a geo lookup. And if, by the way, all documentation follows the same structure. We show you we talk about what it is. We show you the syntax. We show you some examples. So let me just run down here and grab one example. You notice here it's saying look up latitude, longitude, and all these other fields. Let's go grab all those fields as well. I'm going to go all the way to Metro code and just plop it into my run here. So I'm not only going to look for latitude and longitude, I'm going to look for country code, country name, and all that stuff, and then I'm also going to count by all that, right? So let's run it. Let's run that query. And what it's going to come up is it's going to look at all my Live Apache data. It's going to parse out that IP address, and then it's going to look up that look up all these fields based off of that IP address. So there you go. Here it is. So for this latitude and for this longitude, I found out that it's in the U.S., it's in California, in Cupertino, under this postal code, under this area code, and so on. And here's how many hits I've actually gotten from each one of those as well. Okay, so having said that, I can easily use any of these guys in here, actually this one in particular, the map, and I can plot that into a nice little map showing me all the different places in the world where my hits are coming from. Let's say that I wanted to focus only on these ones here. Let's see where that is coming from. Oops, I keep rolling the wrong way. So these ones seem to be coming from France. Let's say that we only cared for, let's say, the ones in France. So how would you do that? Oops, where is it? Geo Lookup, here it is. So most likely what you would want to do is go to the table view of it, and you notice that country name is France or country code equals FR. So all you would have to do is put a where clause, right? I could put that where clause shortly after the lookup because I need to know what that is, and I can say where country, code equals FR. And if all goes well, that is going to limit to only the stuff coming from France, and in the same manner I can plot it and the map is just going to show me stuff in France. It's only coming from one location, so it's probably showing there. There you go. All right, so pretty straightforward. Geo Lookup is a very popular one. People really like to put some maps out there and show what's going on in their environments. Let's talk about Outlier. This is great. This is definitely a pretty good operator. What Outlier allows me to do is, actually, let's do this. Let's go back to basics and say, okay, show me only those messages that have a status code of 404. Why can I do this? Why can I do status code equals 404? Well, because that field has already been parsed. So there's a great advantage of having those field extraction rules, right? The fact that you can parse that and then you can use that in your query in the first line nonetheless, which is the best thing to do because then you're limiting the number of results you're getting back. So I'm getting only those things that have a status code 404. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to count those 404s. But notice what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a better name. Rather than counting and getting that funky name that just was underscore count, I just gave it a better name. I'm sorry, here. Using the as server error count just gives it a better name. So I'm counting the status codes as server error count. Now, remember that if I want to see trends over time, I can use time slice for that. So I can say, take these 60 minutes, slice them by 1 minute, and then count by time slice. So now what I'm going to see is I'm going to get a count for each one of the minutes that I just ran it. So at 10:20 I had this many, at 10:09 I had this many. If I sort them, it'd be a little bit better. So at 9:46 I had this many, 47 this many, 48 this many, and you get the point. This is just giving me a count by time. So far so good, right? Well, what if I wanted to identify when I have a huge spike in my counts? It doesn't seem like I have that much of a spike in here. But what if I wanted to keep an eye on that spike? That's where Outlier comes into play. I'm going to run it and then I'm going to talk you to what it does. Outlier takes that count, which is shown here, and then it starts calculating an upper limit, a lower limit, an indicator. It shows you a mean, a standard deviation. Why does it do that? Because it allows you to, the blue line in the middle is plotting the actual count. The light blue shaded area is showing me the standard deviation. And in this case, I chose the standard deviation of 2. This thing that says threshold here is one of the pulleys or the levers I can pull that is giving me more or less standard deviation. So if I were to choose 4, I bet you that I'm going to have a lot less pink triangles. The pink triangles are what is showing me what is outside of that standard deviation. So in this case, my standard deviation of 4 is bigger, and I only have a few things outside of that standard deviation. Direction says, should I point out the outliers that are both above and below, or only the ones that are above, or only the ones that are below? So let's say that I only want the ones that are above, and I say direction plus. You'll see that the same query will only give me 2 standard deviation. 2 outliers, because those are the only 2 that are above the threshold. And then the last few things that are here that I didn't talk about are consecutive and window. Consecutive means how many consecutive outliers should that be outside of the standard deviation before I notify you. And window means, okay, for this data point here, how many data points should I look back in order to know what a standard deviation should look like? So that's what it's saying there. Is how many data points should I go back to identify what a standard deviation should look like and be able to figure out what the standard deviation is at this point. So of course, if I change this to a bigger number, let's say 10, that is a bigger window. That's a lot more data points that it's looking in the past to identify what the standard deviation should look here. And it makes your standard deviation a lot smoother because it's looking at more data points for that. All right. So Outlier is a fantastic, fantastic way to look at historical data and be able to identify what really is an outlier going forward. All right. So the other one I wanted to show you was Predict. Predict is pretty cool. Let me run it. Predict is essentially saying, I'm looking at your data now. In this case, it's looking at number of requests against my web server. And it is also making a prediction of what will happen in the future. In this case, I said 12 data points, and each data point is 5 minutes. So look ahead 1 hour's worth, right? And if you notice, if you plot this, what it's saying is, here is what your requests look like right now, and I foresee that it's going to continue at the same level for the next hour. Or it could have been declining. Maybe this was a queue that I'm looking at, and I'm trying to identify when are all the tickets going to go out of that queue, and when am I going to hit 0 and have no tickets in that queue. One thing I want to point out in here, let me just go to the documentation and type Predict. One of the things I want to point out is the fact that what I'm showing you right now is a very simplistic model of Predict. There is an autoregressive model that can take into account, let me just go back here. So this is what I showed you, right, the very simple straight line. But if you had a very variability, let's say that on Mondays you had this big spike for some reason, you can use the autoregressive model to take into account those spikes as well and add them into your prediction in Sumo. Okay, great. Let's get back to this. So I've shown you a few good ones. Let me show you 2 more that I think are going to be pretty meaningful for you guys. Let me close a couple of these just to make it easy here to see. I'm trying to leave a few that I'm going to try to plot later on, but for now I'm trying to close some stuff. Okay. The other one I want to show you is one called Log Reduce, and it's incredibly helpful. But first, let's look at some data here. Let's say that I was looking at my my security data, which is called Snort, but I can't remember what I can't remember exactly what what the source category is. So you notice I just search for anything that has the word security. There it is. It's called Lab Security Snort. But this works. So I'm looking at my snort data, security data for the last, let's say for the last 15 minutes. Actually, let's look for security. In case I have a lot of security data, let's look for this. All right. So for the last 15 minutes, I have about 1,500 messages that came back. And let's say that I'm the security engineer. What I want to know is what's happening in my environment. Am I getting new attacks? Am I getting old attacks? Am I getting, is there something that I need to keep my eye on, right? If I know what the kind of attacks I usually get, well, guess what? I can go search for them. If I know that I usually have like information leak, I can look for the words information leak, right? And I will get those results, and I can see if I'm getting that kind of stuff, and I can do something about it. If I'm getting some sort of a web attack, I can do the same. I can search for the word web attack or the words web attacks or web attack and see if I'm getting any of those, see if my logs are showing any of that kind of stuff. But the problem often is that I don't know what I'm searching for. I know that I have a lot of results, in this case of lines of logs, log messages, but I don't know what is it that exactly that I'm looking for. So what you can do is you can hit this log reduce button, and I call it the easy button because what it's doing is it's taking those 1,500 or 1,600 messages, and it's reducing those messages into what we call signatures. So it came back and it said, okay, Mario, check it out. Out of those 1,610 messages, about 800, so about half of those messages all look the same, very similar. They all had this kind of format. They said some date. Of course, the date's going to be different because every message gets stamped with a different date. But it said web miscellaneous, bug port, classification, attempted information leak. Yes, the IP address is going to be different, the port is going to be different, but for the most part, the message is very similar. So it already knocked off 50% of the messages that I had to look through, right? Which is pretty cool. I don't have to now have a detailed look at that. Then it's saying about 400 of those messages have this same exact format, and about 150 messages have this format, and you get the point. It's essentially saying I took all these messages and I grouped them into signatures so you didn't have to read through every single one of them. And as a user, what I probably am more interested in, what are the things that are happening only once or twice? So I just turn my my count upside down, and I can see here is a message that I hadn't seen before. Oh, look, it looks like I'm getting an attempt of user privilege. Someone's trying to do a remote command and attempt to gain privilege of this stuff. So this is definitely something I want to investigate. So you notice how I was able to get to this very quickly without having to sift through 1,600 messages, but straight into just looking at using log reduce to do that. And if I want to do further investigation, guess what? I can click on that message. I can go and find out what was going on with that message. So I clicked it, and it shows me the message itself. Now I know the TCP. Now I know the IP address. I know the port. I can see what it was doing. I can do additional investigation on that IP address if I wanted to, or perhaps what I want to know is what was happening right before this remote command attempt. What was happening right after it? So I can do that. I can look at all my lab security snort data and look for surrounding messages, let's say 1 minute before, 1 minute after, or perhaps I only want to do it for this particular host. And in that case, it'll expand my query, and it'll include, in this case, 223 messages, which is half of those are, more likely half of those are right before. And here's my message itself. So you notice it's on page 5 of 9 because there's 4 pages worth of messages before it, and then there's 4 pages of data worth 4 pages worth of data after it as well. And I can now sift through those messages if I want to and investigate. Okay, so log reduce, just a great way to easily sift through the noise and try to get to what's going on in my query. I want to show you another cool one. Here's one called log compare. And log compare is pretty interesting. Let me run it, and then I will then I'll show you. I'm going to run it with a default of 24 hours. So what log compare is doing now is it's running a log reduce now for the last 15 minutes, and it's running a second log reduce for 15 minutes, but 24 hours ago. So think of this. I run a log reduce now, and I compare it to the signatures that happened a day ago or 24 hours ago. And when it's coming back, it's saying, listen, Mario, this here that right now is happening 906 times is only 0.73% more than it did 24 hours ago. However, let's find something a little more interesting. However, this one, look at this one, virus outbound bad file attachment. This one is happening 12 times this time, which is an increase of 46% more than was happening. So perhaps this attack was only getting started about an hour ago, a day ago, and now I'm seeing a lot more of that message coming in. And you get the point. Like, look at this one. This one only happened 5 times, which is 63% less than it did last time. So whatever I put in place to stop that is actually working because it's decreasing, whereas this one is 192. And here are some interesting ones. These are attacks that I hadn't seen last time, and now I'm seeing. So here is, I had two messages with this successful administrator privilege gain. This kind of message was not showing up at all 24 hours ago, and now I do see it. And just for completeness, let me go to page 2. Here is one where I was seeing it before, and now it's completely gone. Now I had 0 counts of that signature because I got rid of that attack altogether. I did whatever I had to do to get rid. So log compare, again, what it allows you to do is it allows you to choose a time period, whether it's the default 24 hours or a custom time period, and it allows me to look at a log reduce now versus a log reduce then. And the last thing that it also allows you to do is perhaps you have different environments. Maybe I want to look at dev versus prod. So let's say that you had different types of environments here, and you wanted to look at the difference between those two. You certainly can do that with log compare as well. All right, so I've been showing you quite a few operators in here of how you can start doing a little more advanced analytics of what you can start showing. Again, I can't point you to or stress enough how important it is for you to try these labs. They're really going to walk you through some examples. Some of them are the same examples that I just showed you, but others will give you some good ideas of how you can use these same operators in your environment. So again, I'm going to just come in here to the labs and show you that here's one for using log reduce, here's one for using log compare, for using outlier, for using transaction, which is relating messages, and I think those are going to become pretty handy for you as you try it. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is metrics. So all this time I've been talking about logs, which you usually think of from a troubleshooting perspective. But now let's move a layer higher, if you will, on the problem, on the troubleshooting problem, and let's start with the monitoring. And monitoring usually happens from a metrics side. So again, labs have metrics, and you're going to try these. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go and choose some example from here to show you how metrics work. But before I do that, metrics, where can we bring metrics from? There's 3 main sources where we can grab metrics from. First one is host metrics. So if you already have an installed collector in any of your environments, guess what? You can just turn on the host metrics and we will start pulling the metrics out of that particular server as well. Nothing else to install. Second place we can grab it from is from the AWS metrics. So AWS concentrates all its metrics in CloudWatch. We can connect to CloudWatch and grab all the metrics from there. And the third one is if you have Graphic compatible metrics, CollectD, DropWizard, StatD, guess what? We can grab those as well. I'll share with you guys links, the slides, as well as this recording, and you will see that these links actually take you to how to set up any of these collection things as well. As you saw in the Quick Start webinar, we have apps for a lot of, and by apps I mean out-of-the-box content that comes for a lot of the log world. We also have it for the metrics world. So in this case, I'm showing here a screenshot of the metrics app, the host metrics app. As a matter of fact, let me switch to my instance and show you that. I'm going to go into my instance. I think I installed that app. Let's just go find out. I'm going to go to my folder under apps. I have quite a few here. So let's see, do I have host metrics? Yeah, there it is, host metrics. Let's see if I have anything in here. I installed it a while back, so I don't know if my data is still current to show you. Oh, there is no data in here. Okay, apologies about that. Let's go see if I find some apps for this. Let me go library. I'm going to go to my personal folder. I think I installed the second version recently. Oh yeah. So this is my training server, and I'm pulling the host metrics apps from my training server, and it's giving me things like CPU idle, average CPU idle. It's giving me a CPU load for 1, 5, and 15 minutes. It's giving me free system memory, used minus buffered, cached memory, and all that good stuff. Disk available, network out buys, network IC buys, disk used. Again, this is just for one server. If I was showing this, if I had multiple servers, I could show multiple lines for different servers, or I could show an average of all servers in here. And the cool thing about all these apps, I know that I talked about this in the Quick Start webinar, but the great thing about all these apps is that you can always click on this little icon, and guess what? It's going to take you to the query of how this was built. So here I'm showing you that I'm pulling content type equals host metrics. That's the metadata, right? The metadata is host metrics, so content type equals host metrics. The metric itself is the CPU load 1 minute, and then I'm using an operator called average by metric to average it. And there's a few other operators I have in here. Most of these you can probably figure it out. The average, the count, the delta, the filter, the min, max, parsing, quantize. Unfortunately, we won't have time to cover all of these, but you get the point. These are very similar operators to the ones you saw on the log side as well. So let's start a query from scratch so you can see how that works. I'm going to go here into new and just click on metrics, and that gives me a new metric query with nothing in it. And I'm going to cheat. I just copied from the labs itself. I just copied one that says type equals bookings, metric equals success count. And you notice that it plotted all the successes, all the count of successes that I've had in the last 15 minutes. By the way, there is a nice assistant here. If I went again and said type or TYIPE, it shows me the different tags that it matches. And then I can choose bookings, and I can say then metric equals success, let's say the fail count. I don't think I'm going to have any fail counts because I haven't inserted any errors into my lab, but there it is. I've gotten 0 fails all the way, but I've gotten a lot of successful ones in here. So a couple of things that I can do. One is I can toggle on and off some of these. For example, I can turn off those and then I just see fails, which are 0s, or I can turn those off and turn these ones off. I can play with the settings, so I can maybe change the color palette. Perhaps I want to do this color instead. Maybe I want to change the chart type to make it an area. Perhaps I want to do it as a stacked chart rather than just as a overlay. Perhaps I want to change the width of the line and make it a 2-point. So you see, you can play with a little bit of the stuff in here. You can change the axes. You can change the ranges for those axes. If you look at the legend, it'll show you a little bit more information about each of the lines plotted. So this is for the namespace training, the node itself that it's plotting, the pod that is plotting, the region, and so on and so forth. So a little bit more information about each one of those lines that it plotted. And if I had any log messages overlaid, I could see those overlaid messages in here. How do you overlay log messages? Pretty easy. This last line here allows you to overlay messages. So what if I was looking for source category, easy for me to say, equals something like, oh, actually, I'm in a training instance, right? So let's say training travel checkout, which is one of the things that usually gives me errors. So if I run that query, what it shows you is it shows you the messages up at the top. The darker the square, the orange square, the more messages that happen in that particular point in time. So it looks like here I had a bit of a peak in terms of bookings. Guess what? There seems to be more messages happening at the time that there's more bookings because it generates a lot more logs for that. And that's what it shows you. If I had some kind of errors, if I started showing a fail, I could even use keywords. I can say, only show me those messages that have the word errors in it. Guess what? I have absolutely no errors because look at this. I'm seeing no messages at the top. Let's just change it to the word, I don't know, Mozilla. And you will see that there's going to be some messages at the top, and only those. Oh no, this is training checkout. Sorry. Let's see what kind of keywords that data would have. Let's go look at the log messages. These are the messages for that. So it has the word info in it. All of them have the word info in it. I'm trying to find out something that would be. Let's just grab this processing cart checkout process. So I'm going to copy that, and then I can come back to my query and say, only show me those that have the words starting cart checkout process. Run that, and it'll only show you those messages that are having those keywords in it as well. All right, so again, I'm going to encourage you to try the labs themselves. I just showed you this logs and metrics overlay, which is the ability to correlate the logs to the metrics so that you can troubleshoot the metrics that you were monitoring. And here's a better example of that. In this case, I'm looking at the bookings, at the count bookings. I'm looking at the fail counts. Whenever I have an increase in failed counts, guess what? I also have logs that have the word error in it. So this is a very good visual correlation of errors to counts of failures in your bookings as well. So again, I'm going to recommend that you try some of the labs themselves because those are really going to make it meaningful for you. Again, if I go to the labs, I'll show you that. Here's a lab showing you how outliers work. I should show you that pretty quickly. Outliers in metrics are a little more visual. You click on this little icon here, and you can toggle them on or off, and you can decide to show perhaps the top 10 for the whole chart, for the queries, for the series, whatever it is that you want to do. You can even look at the band itself. Let me just turn off some stuff here so it doesn't show you too much, and it makes it a little easier. Let me get rid of this stuff in here. Okay, so if I run this query now, cool. There is my query. Perhaps I want to view. I don't have much outliers in here, so that's why it's not showing me much. Everything is pretty. Oops. Yeah, it's not actually, for some reason it's not changing the chart, and it's not giving it to me. But hopefully, when you try it, it'll be working okay. I'm having a little bit of a bandwidth issue as well, so I wonder if that's the case. All right, but try it out. For sure, try these labs. It's going to show you some basic analytics, then how to compare KPIs at different time periods using time shift. One of the coolest ones is identifying rate of change. So you might not necessarily be interested in how in bytes and out bytes, the count of them, but on the rate of change, so you know if something is going on in your environment. Okay. So the last few things that I'm going to talk about is monitoring your data. So you can do it through two things. One is dashboards, and the other one is scheduled searches. Dashboards are pretty straightforward. And as a matter of fact, I probably showed you most of what I can show you about dashboards during the Quick Start webinar. When you want to create a new dashboard, it's as simple as saying, listen, add this to a dashboard. You give the panel a name, let's say bookings. you give the dashboard a name. So I'm just going to call it Mario Dashboard for lack of better creativity. And it's going to create a new dashboard called Mario. I can put it in my own personal folder or some other folders if I want to. I can click on Add, and as you'd expect, it just creates a dashboard with one panel in it. If I want to add more panels into it, it's as simple as going to the query, saying Add to Dashboard, and adding it to that Mario dashboard as I saw before. So what I'm showing you here is I can have metrics dashboards alongside query dashboard. That's no problem at all. We can easily handle that. Let's just grab a couple more. Let's grab this outlier one and just click on Add to Dashboard. So you see how simple it is. I can literally just go and find the queries that I wanted, just start adding them to my dashboard. And let's just grab one more here. This one that happens to be in a table format, just so that you can see it. I can say Add to Dashboard and keep it in table format. Let's call it GitHub users, right? And put it in the Mario dashboard. Oh, there we go. Click on Add, and it was as simple as that. Now, you might want to start doing a little bit more formatting so this looks a little nicer. So you might want to include, perhaps you want to include a title, My First Dashboard, and you might want to also include some text, because remember, you might be creating this dashboard, but it might be someone else actually looking at the data in here. So you might want to specify some details. So here is what you're looking at, and don't worry if it doesn't da-da-da. This is all in Spanish, by the way. That's why you don't understand it, but trust me, it says something in there. You can add dashboard links to this stuff. Maybe you want to point them to some other dashboard and all that good stuff, right? So if you submit it, you now have some stuff that you can move around. Perhaps you want to make this as long as the dashboards themselves. Maybe you want to put this one at the top because it makes sense to give them a little, detail about what you're showing them. You can enlarge this if you want to, and you can easily move things around. Maybe this one makes sense to show it as a large one, and this one in here as a table. And there you go. In less than 10 minutes, I was able to create a dashboard showing you some of the information that I care about. There's a few other things that you can do. You can toggle theme. A lot of people like this, the ability to be able to change the colors to display this in the Operations Center. Each one of these, because I'm still in editing mode, each one of these has a cogwheel. So you can go to this cogwheel and go change some of the things. For example, I might want to show it as a pie chart. And by the way, I want to truncate the label in the end or in the middle. If I had to, I can say this is a pie, or as a donut, I can show don't show borders and all that. You know, a couple of things that we can do in here. There's another really cool thing that I can do. By default, if you click on a panel, it takes you to the query behind it, right? Whether it's a metrics query or a logs query, it just takes you to the query behind it. But what if you wanted to allow someone to click on a dashboard and be taken to some other dashboard that is going to show you a little more detail? Well, you can do that by doing this. You can change colors if you wanted to as well. So if you want to start with a different color series, what you cannot do is you cannot change the query. You'll notice that the query has been grayed out and I can't change it. And the reason for that is because we don't want you to have a broken dashboard. What you have to do in order to change a query is we will force you to stop editing, and then once you're in non-editing mode, you can go to the query behind it. For example, I can go to this query in here, or maybe I can go, let's choose, this one's good. I'm going to go to this query in here. I can look at the query. Oh, actually, remember that we set it so that we would go to another dashboard. Sorry about that. Let me go back to the dashboard I was looking at, Mario dashboard. Let's just click on this one. All right. I'm going to click here and show it in search. And look at this here. It's smart enough to know that I just came from a dashboard. So once I'm done with the changes, I can either add it. Let's say that I want to give it a bigger threshold or a smaller threshold of 3. I run the query. I can either update the dashboard that I just came from, which is what I wanted to do, or I can add it to a brand new dashboard if I want to. And it even asks, you have a different time frame. Do you want to keep that time frame or use the original one, which is what I want to do in this case? And what you see now is an updated dashboard with an updated query that I have in here, right? Okay, so pretty cool. Last but not least, actually no, three more things I should say. The first one is you have the ability to turn a dashboard into live mode. What that means is this dashboard is going to be displaying in your operations center, and you want this dashboard to be running on a regular basis. Therefore, if it's a 60-minute dashboard like this one here, minute 61 is going to fall off, and minute 1 is going to come in, and the dashboard will always be refreshed. So that's what you want to do with a live mode. Second thing I want to show you is you can add filters to your dashboard. So if you want to allow people to filter out by maybe their region or by their business unit or by prod or dev in their environment, you can do that. Right now, because I'm not in edit mode, it just tells me, listen, there are no dashboards for you, there are no filters for you to play with. But since I am the owner of this dashboard and I can verify it through here, created by Mario, I can click on this edit pencil, and now I can actually add some filters for others to use. So let's say that I wanted to, I don't know, allow people to look at, what would be a good one? Let's just choose here, status codes. All right, so I can say, I can edit this and say, enter the code in question, for example. Not the best of examples, but now what I'm doing is I'm allowing any other user when they're in, because they will not be users, right? They'll be in user mode. So they'll come in here, they can click on the filter, and then they can enter whatever status code they want to. And anything that that filter applies to will get reset to show you queries with that. So in this case, well, there's no data to display because there are no committers with a 404 in it. But you get the point. That's how you can use filters to use these dashboards as templates and share it with a larger audience in your environment. Last thing, speaking of sharing, is sharing your content. So what you want to do as much as possible is to share your dashboards. And the reason for that is because you don't want the same dashboards to be recreated over and over and over. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can share it with the world, or you can share it with very specific people. If you notice here, I can make this dashboard accessible even outside of the organization. If I turn that on, all I have to do is share this link with someone who is across the globe who's not even in my company and doesn't have a logon to Sumo Logic, and they will be able to access this dashboard. But if that's not what you want to share with very specific people that don't have a logon to Sumo, then you can make this dashboard accessible only to IP addresses that you whitelist. And of course, you're going to have to go do some little settings here in the dashboard IP whitelist. You're going to have to add them. Now, that's the least secure of the options. The more secure, the securer options are that you can specify roles. In my case, I have a trainee role in my training instance. I have a training analyst role, so I can say, for these two roles, I want them to have only view access to this dashboard. But I'm going to add another level here for, let's say, Frank, who might also be a trainee, but for him in particular, I actually want to give him edit access. And for this other person in here, let's say, do I have someone named Corey? Yes. And for Corey, I'm actually going to give Corey a manage access to this role. And if I click on done, that's exactly the kind of access that they're going to receive in here. I won't do that just now because I don't want to spam these people with a little email alert saying that they actually got that access. So I'm just going to X this out before I send it. But you get the point. That's how you can go about giving different access to different users for the content that you create. Okay, so I've talked about dashboards. Incredibly useful, helpful, definitely get them out there. But one of the better tools, one of the tools that make it a lot easier to manage your data is, let me close all this stuff, is the alerts. Alerts are going to make it a lot easier to keep an eye on your stuff, not because you're eyeballing it every day, but because it's going to alert you of some critical event. So creating an alert is incredibly easy. creating meaningful alerts or interesting alerts is a little more challenging, and I want to show you today how to do that. So I'm going to open some examples. I'm going to open a good alert, I'm going to open a better alert, and I'm going to open the best alert in here. And I'm going to run all three just to show you what that looks like. So let's start with the good alert. Let's say that I want to keep an eye on my 404s, right? I'm having a lot of 404s, and I want to get alerted when I have a large number of 404s happening in my instance. So what I can do is I can create this query where I'm saying, listen, show me source category equals Apache access and anything that has a status code of 404. I want you to time slice it by 1 minute and then count by time slice. And by the way, if I ever have a count that is higher than 100, or let's say, let's make it a little more interesting. Let's say any higher than 200, then show me the results in here. Oh man, I have quite a lot. So let's say 250. But you notice that I'm having to edit this threshold to come up with something that is meaningful. All right. So if I have more than 300 404s in 1 minute, I want to see some results. So there you go. Here are my results when I happen to have more than 300 404 status codes. Excuse me. Okay. So, oops, sorry about that. I hit the wrong button on my, oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me go back in here and, come on, behave. There we go. All right, so I am showing you where count is 300. Let's say that I want to schedule, I want to create a schedule search out of this, an alert. So all I have to do is save this query, and as part of saving the query, I have the ability to schedule the search. So I could say, I want the search to run every hour. I want to grab 60 minutes worth of data, run in this particular time frame if you want. So you can choose not time frame, a time zone, I should say. And then what do I want to send a notification? So I have two options. Send me a notification every time it completes, or probably more interesting, only send me a notification if the number of results is greater than 0. Actually, this is a great one. This works. Why? Because if I don't have more than 300 404s, I'm going to get no results, and therefore I'm going to get no alerts. But if I ever have more than 300, I'm going to have results here, and in that case, the number of results is going to be greater than 0. So in that case, I want you to email me, right? And I can specify here my email address, and I can specify some sort of a subject for my email and what I want to include in the email, including some attachment with the results. And I can save it, and that's it. I just created my first scheduled search, and it would run. That's a good search, but the problem with this search is that it has a static threshold. It has a 300, and let's say if my volume fluctuates between morning and evening, then I'm kind of stuck because this is just going to be giving me a lot of false positives. So let's talk about the second alert, which is a better one. What this one is doing is same thing, looking only at the 404s. It's also time slicing. It's also counting, but this time I'm using Outlier. And if you guys remember, what Outlier does is it looks at previous history, and it determines, according to previous history, if I happen to be inside or outside of the static of the standard deviation. So in this particular case, I'm getting 3 data points that are outside of the standard deviation, and I would want to alert on those. So how would I alert on that? Well, let me show you the table view of this picture. That looks like under count violation, it's going to have a 1 wherever I have those pink triangles. So all I have to do is put a where clause saying where count violation is greater than 0, which means I should get at least 3 lines in there because there's 3 pink triangles. And now, if you guys paid attention just now, I can save the query, schedule the search, say I wanted to run it hourly, every 60 minutes, remember all that good stuff, if the following condition is met, right? If my number of results is greater than 0, than 0, I want to get an alert. Why does this work? Because if I don't get any pink triangles, I will not get any count violations, therefore I will not get any results, and I will not get any alerts. But if I have pink triangles, that means I will get results, and then I will get alerted. All right, so far so good. Last but not least, I want to show you the better, or the best option of all these. The best option uses Outlier, but instead of using Outlier just on 404s, it's going to look at the context, meaning let me look at the 200s as well, because the 200s are real proof of the entire traffic, whereas 404s are just showing me part of the picture. Think of this. If I had a spike at 10 a.m., what's going to happen to my spike in traffic, I should say. If my traffic spikes, then just out of sheer statistics, I'm going to get a spike in my 404s as well. So maybe it's not something that I have to do anything. It just happened to spike because I just got more traffic. So if I look at my 200s, and if I look at my 404s at the same time, and then I do some sort of a failure rate, so that I can look at the increase of 200s versus 404s and compare that instead. So that's exactly what this is doing. Again, I time slice. I'm going to create two new fields, one called success and fail. If status code matches 202 or 200s, then I'm going to create a whole bunch of ones. So success is going to be 1, otherwise it's going to be 0. By the way, this could be simplified to be this. I just wanted to show you yet another way of doing this. But I could say if code equals 200, and same in here. I can say if code equals 404, because I know it's only going to be 200 and 404 because I said so in this first line, right? Okay, I was just trying to show you the matches operator. But if status code equals 200, then set it as a 1, otherwise it's 0. So I create two new fields that have a whole bunch of 1s and 0s. Then I sum them up. I say, okay, sum the successes as success count, and sum the fails as fail count by time slice. So now I have these counts by time slice. And then I can say, all right, divide my counts, my fails by my successes, and that's going to create what I call a failure rate. And now I can apply an outlier on that failure rate. And that's what this is doing. Here's my count of successes. Here's my count of fails. Here's my failure rate. And now I get the upper, the lower, the error, and all that good stuff on that failure rate, which allows me to plot that line. And by the way, there's not a lot of variability in my data. Let's choose a bigger time frame. Maybe there'll be some variability at some point. But what you're seeing is that, there we go. Yeah, just a little more. What you're seeing is that it created an outlier on that data, and whenever there's something outside of that, I'm pulling it out. So these pink triangles are showing me the case where my increase in 404 was at a higher rate than my increase in 200s. Therefore, there was a true spike of 404s in comparison to the overall traffic. Again, all I have to do is go back to the table. Notice that the field is called failure rate violation, and if failure rate violation is set to 1, that means that there is an outlier. So I just do where failure rate violation is greater than 0, and same story. Save as, schedule this search, last 6 hourly if I want to, grab last 6 hours worth of data or last 60 minutes, however you want to schedule this, and this is the exact same thing. If my number of results is greater than 0, then I should be notified, in this case by email. All right, so what I wanted to show you was the fact that it's easy to create an alert. It's a lot more effective to create meaningful alerts, as I just showed you. Right, the last thing I'm going to show you about alerts is you have a few different options in here. Email was pretty simple. Script action, that's a great one. What script action allows you to do is to create your own custom script that is going to live on your servers and that Sumo can call. So that script does whatever you want. As a matter of fact, Sumo has no idea what that script does. All it's going to do is it's going to call it, because you're going to tell us where that script resides, which, by the way, has to be in a place where you have a Sumo collector so that we can go back to that machine and call that script. But basically, you tell us where that script lives and what is it written on. Is it Perl, Python, Ruby, or whatever the case might be? And then we can call that script, and we can pass to that script the results of this search, and you can do with that script whatever you want. That becomes very useful for folks that have internal systems that are downstream that you want to pass data onto as well. ServiceNow, ServiceNow is a ticketing system, and we have a tight connection with them. So an alert could open a ticket within ServiceNow, kind of similar to like a Jira system. It requires a little bit of integration. Our documentation is pretty good on how to set that up. And the last two, let me talk about Save Index first. Save to Index. Save to Index is very simple. Basically, what it says is if you run a query, or if you run this hourly search, you can store those results under a new index called My Results, for example. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a new index, put all the stuff in there, append it, and at some point you can query that index and just return the results from there. But the most interesting one, or I should say the most used one, is Webhook. You can create connections to HipChat, Slack, just about anything that has a REST API. And once those connections are created, which by the way is it's an administrative function, and I'll show you in a little bit where to create them. But once you create them, they're going to show up in here. And once they show up, you can even customize the payload a little more if you want to. Click on Save, and then this alert is going to be delivered through that connection, through that medium as well. All right. Oops, I lost my connection. So where do you create those alerts? If you go back in, those connections. If you go back here to Administration, Manage Data, and you go to Settings, you will find something called Connections in here, and you will see that I've created a few. Here's the HipChat, Slack, and Mix panel that I created, but essentially you can create just about anything from here. These are the ones that we know what the payload looks like, so we just want to get you started. But if you're creating a connection to something that we haven't worked with, go in here and knock yourself silly creating the payload for what you need out there. All right, so I've shown you, I think I've shown you quite a bit today, talking about monitoring your data, so dashboards, how to alert. Again, there are some labs for you to try out. Creating meaningful alerts is very similar to what I just showed you in here. I won't go through the use cases, but I will share these slides with you. The use cases, in reality, all of these point to our, these are all URLs that point to our community, and I should just show you our community anyway. But our community, I opened it twice. Our community is a great tool for you to be able to post questions, to find answers. In this case, Graham Watt, who's one of our top sales engineers here, he's showing how to create an alert on ratios or percentages. And he goes through the explanation along with screenshots of what he's putting together. But look at this. A lot of these queries look very similar to what we built. Today. As a matter of fact, some of them even look identical to what we built. Why am I pointing you to here? Because very, very, very useful site to have. Let me just go to community here. I should have clicked on this one. Very useful site for if you have questions around sending data, if you have questions around how to manage Sumo, general discussions. This one in particular, the query library is a wealth of information of common queries that come up. As a matter of fact, let me go straight to the bottom and look at one called Creating Meaningful Alerts. This should look very familiar, doesn't it? This is exactly the one that I just showed you around the best way of creating an alert. But the reason I'm posting it here is because I'm showing you here for Apache Access and status codes, but you could be doing this in your own custom apps, looking at error codes or whatever it might be. Here's the exact same query, looking at maybe tracking percentage of errors, if that's what you want to do. So the queries start looking very similar and can serve as templates as you start using them in other sources as well. All right, so where do you go from here? Well, I've shown you quite a lot, but what I want to point out is in the UI itself, if I go back to the UI, if I go to the Home tab, there is this Learn tab. And this Learn tab has videos, the Quick Start itself, some of the new intro videos, the tutorials if you guys haven't tried them. But equally important, there's links to the documentation, there's links to the cheat sheet, which I'll show you in just a second. It's an operators cheat sheet that has all the different operators that we have. Of course, way too many for you to just read straight through. But the nice thing is that it's broken down by functionality. So here's all the different parsing operators that I talked about today. Here's a lot of the aggregating functions and whatnot. So if you're looking for a function, you can go find it in here. Let's say that you're looking for the if operator. And it shows you a little example, so you can go use it, or if you want more detail, you can always click on that, and it's going to take you to the page and show you how to use that operator as well. All right. So yeah, whenever you can, come to the Learn tab and get your answers from there. And last but not least, I can't stress enough, I think you guys are on your way to this level 2 certification. You just went through the webinar. If you try those labs, you're going to be totally prepared for this. You have 3 attempts. It's an online exam. It's 30 multiple choice questions. You have about 90 minutes to complete it. Most people complete it in about 35 to 40 minutes. So ample time for you to take the test. And good luck. Let me pause the recording for now, but I'm going to open it to questions.